Maya stared into her coffee, swirling the bitter liquid as if it could wash away the sting of humiliation lodged deep in her chest. She had lost count of how many times she had sat in this exact cafe, nursing her pride like it was a wounded pet. Each time a man had promised her the world and left her with nothing but excuses and a gnawing sense of inadequacy. 3 times, 3 painfully humiliating times, and today the shame felt heavier than ever. The chair across from her remained empty, as if mocking her with its emptiness. She tapped her fingers on the table, counting the seconds since her latest disappointment had left her staring at a text that had arrived 10 minutes too late. "Sorry, something came up," it read. Something always came up every time Maya exhaled, the air tasting faintly of despair and stale cinnamon from the pastries behind the counter. She had wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to throw the cup at the wall, but she didn't. Maya was tired of dramatics. She wanted control, even if control now felt like an illusion. She buried her face in her hands, her hair falling like a curtain over her world. She could almost hear the echoes of her own laughter from happier days, the naive faith she had once placed in people who didn't deserve it. The cafe's bell chimed as someone entered, and Maya barely looked up. Her gaze was fixed on the condensation dripping from her cup. She noticed, almost subconsciously, a young clerk with sharp eyes and an easy smile bustling behind the counter. He was cleaning tables with a kind of purposeful energy that made the room feel warmer, lighter, somehow more alive than her own pitiful existence. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke. "Rough day." His voice carried the casual curiosity of someone who didn't yet know how deep the scar ran. Maya raised an eyebrow, unsure if she wanted sympathy or mockery. You could say that. Her voice was flat, careful not to betray too much. The clerk leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Maybe you need a different strategy. Ever consider marrying someone who's also been stood up? Odds are better. You'd at least be in the same league of misery." Maya blinked. She stared at him. Then, despite herself, she laughed. Not a full, bright laugh, the kind that would make people think she was fine, but a hollow, bitter chuckle that rattled inside her like loose coins. Somehow, the absurdity of the statement cracked open a small door in her grief. It was funny. It was terrible. And it was exactly what she needed. Marry someone who's been stood up, she muttered to herself, turning the phrase over like a curious puzzle piece. The clerk's smirk widened, as if he had anticipated this response. "Exactly. Think about it. Both of you could bring all that unfulfilled romantic energy together. A perfect match of abandoned hearts." Maya took a sip of her coffee, scalding her tongue, and winced. But inside, a spark had ignited, however faint. She realized, with a mix of exasperation and amusement, that she had stopped mourning for the moment and started imagining. Imagining a partner who understood, a partner who knew the humiliation of being left behind, a partner who didn't make her feel broken, just human. Her thoughts were interrupted by the entrance of another customer, a man, hunched slightly, checking his phone with an almost painful intensity. His expression twisted for a moment, disappointment, frustration, loneliness before he looked up and caught her gaze. Maya froze, startled, as if recognizing a reflection of her own wounded self. It was a moment so brief it should have meant nothing. But somehow it felt like fate sneaking a smirk at her misery. She returned to her coffee, but now the bitterness seemed almost tolerable. The day, though far from over, had just acquired a strange, tentative glimmer of possibility. And for the first time that afternoon, Maya allowed herself a small, unguarded smile. Maya barely noticed the man at first. He looked like any other frustrated customer, hunched over his phone, muttering to himself, shaking his head as if the world had personally offended him. But something about the way his shoulders slumped, the way his fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled, caught her attention. There was a familiarity to his despair, the kind of recognition that startled her. She knew that look. She had worn it herself 3 times this month alone. Their eyes met briefly across the cafe, a flash of mutual understanding, or perhaps mutual humiliation. He looked like he had been stood up, really stood up, and somehow in that instant, Maya felt less alone in the universe. The clerk, still buzzing with unwitting matchmaking energy, winked at her from behind the counter. "See, told you there's hope." Maya rolled her eyes but couldn't hide a smirk. Hope in a cafe full of strangers. The man glanced at her again, hesitating, then approached the counter to order. As he did, Maya caught snippets of his conversation. Yeah, she said she'd meet me, never showed no. I waited an hour." His voice carried the exact same mixture of disbelief and bitter resignation she knew all too well. Maya's mind, which had been nursing heartbreak and bitterness only moments ago, suddenly sparked with an impulsive, ridiculous idea. "What if," she muttered to herself, more amused than serious, "we just married each other?" The words were absurd. Her voice was light, teasing, but the man Ethan, she learned his name moments later, paused, his eyebrows raising in disbelief. "Married, right now, because we were stood up. Yes," Maya said, feeling the laugh slip out despite herself. "Exactly. 2 experts in being ditched. Seems fair. We'd at least be honest about our track record." Ethan stared at her, frozen between incredulity and the faintest trace of a grin. "You're serious? Do you want me to be serious?" Maya shot back with mock irritation, though she found herself enjoying the absurdity. "Because I can be extremely serious. We could negotiate the terms over coffee. Prenups, heartbreak clauses, the usual stuff." He laughed, a short, startled bark that made Maya's heart lift a fraction. He looked around, as if checking that no one else had witnessed this bizarre interaction. Then, finally, he shrugged. "Why not? 10 minutes ago I was crying over my phone like a pathetic loser. Now this seems like the most reasonable plan I've ever heard." And just like that, a handshake was offered, and she accepted. It was ridiculous, spontaneous, and completely unplanned. A pact born from despair, humor, and coincidence. Maya couldn't stop grinning, partly from relief, partly from the sheer absurdity of it all. "Wait," Ethan said, leaning in, "so this isn't just a joke. We're actually going to pretend to." "We'll see how far it goes," Maya replied, equally cautious and mischievous. "But consider this. We're not signing any paperwork. Just mutual understanding, temporary sanity." The clerk, who had been watching the exchange with barely concealed amusement, laughed and clapped his hands. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how true love, or at least a mildly romantic catastrophe, begins. Maya rolled her eyes, but inside, a flutter of something she hadn't felt in a long time stirred. It wasn't exactly hope, it wasn't trust, it wasn't even happiness yet, but it was a start, a spark. And for someone who had spent the past month staring at empty chairs and unanswered texts, a spark felt like a small miracle. They spent the next few minutes, awkwardly, negotiating their terms. Sipping coffee, laughing at the sheer audacity of the situation, and sharing snippets of their stories, each tale of betrayal meeting the others with nods of grim understanding. By the time they parted ways, the cafe felt different, lighter, charged with a strange energy neither could fully explain. Maya left with a sense of cautious curiosity. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in weeks, the sting of being jilted didn't feel quite as sharp. Somehow, in the absurdity of a 10-minute agreement, she had found a strange kind of companionship, a fellow survivor in the battlefield of broken promises. The days that followed their absurd agreement felt like living inside a bubble of suspended reality. Maya found herself thinking about Ethan more than she wanted to admit. Not in the way one dreams about a perfect partner, but in the way one obsesses over a secret escape, route from misery. Someone who understood your pain and laughed with it, not at it. Their 10-minute pact had somehow become a daily mental loop she couldn't shake. Ethan, predictably, was just as complicated. He sent her messages at odd hours, often containing little more than a sarcastic observation about life, heartbreak, or the universe's cruel sense of humor. Survived another coffee without crying. He texted one morning. Maya replied, "Congrats. Your medal is waiting at the bottom of a lukewarm cup." The exchange was ridiculous, trivial, yet comforting in its own absurd way. When they finally met again, it was in the same cafe. The clerk smiled knowingly at them, as if he had orchestrated their collision in the first place. Maya felt a small thrill at the sight of Ethan walking toward her, his hands stuffed into his coat pockets, eyes scanning until they found hers. For the first time, she noticed details she hadn't before. The way his hair fell slightly over his forehead, the faint freckle near his temple, the subtle tension in his jaw when he tried to suppress a smile. "Hello, your most cooperative heartbreak survivor," he said with a mock bow. Maya rolled her eyes but smiled. "And you, the reluctant participant in this farce of fate. Coffee, coffee," he agreed, though he made a face as he sat. "But only if it comes with a side of emotional trauma." They fell into the ritual of sharing their stories, each anecdote punctuated with laughter and incredulous disbelief. Maya recounted her 3 humiliations, the last one still raw, and watched as Ethan listened with uncanny empathy. Not pity, not condescension empathy. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time, and it unnerved her more than she wanted to admit. But amid the laughter and shared misery, another emotion crept quietly into Maya's thoughts: revenge. Not malicious, not vindictive in the ugly sense, but satisfying and poetic. She pictured her third ex, the one who had stood her up most recently, seeing her with someone like Ethan, someone who made her laugh again, someone who mirrored her pain, someone who elevated her beyond the shallow heartbreak he had caused. She began drafting letters she never intended to send, crafting messages full of sharp wit and subtle triumph. One, particularly delicious in her imagination, described her perfect Sunday, laughing with someone who had once been a stranger, sharing jokes about heartbreak, watching the sun cast gold over her happiness, the exact kind of life her ex had failed to notice. Ethan noticed the shift in her demeanor one afternoon. She was smiling at something on her phone, a faint sparkle in her eyes, and he cocked his head. "That looks dangerous. Should I be worried?" "Dangerous," Maya said, hiding the mischievous grin. "No, just poetic justice, poetic justice," he asked, intrigued. "Do I get a role in this masterpiece?" "Only as the unsuspecting hero," she replied, laughing softly. "And maybe the accomplice." It was in that moment, with sunlight streaming across the cafe and the hum of life around them, that Maya realized something terrifying. She was starting to care about Ethan. Not just as a fellow survivor, not just as a partner in her emotional scheming, but as someone whose presence she wanted, whose laughter mattered, whose comfort she craved. And yet she couldn't let herself forget why they had met in the first place. The pact was born of pain, absurdity, and desperation. Allowing herself to fall completely felt dangerous, like walking a tightrope over a canyon filled with past betrayals. Still, when Ethan reached across the table, brushing her hand lightly as he passed her sugar, her heart jumped. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a promise, silent and warm, that maybe happiness could sneak back into her life, even if she had spent so long believing it was lost forever. Maya smiled, letting herself linger in the sensation. Tangled emotions, absurd pacts, and all, she thought. Perhaps this could be the start of something unexpectedly beautiful. And maybe, just maybe, the sweetest revenge she could ever imagine. Maya stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the cuff of her jacket, feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and nerves. Today wasn't about heartbreak or pity, it was about triumph, about reclaiming herself, piece by piece, from the people who had left her stranded in their carelessness. Her exes would be at the same gallery exhibit, a gathering of mutual acquaintances she hadn't planned to attend. But fate, it seemed, had a wicked sense of timing. Ethan appeared behind her, leaning casually against the doorframe, ready to embarrass some exes. He asked, voice low, teasing. Ready to make them regret every call they never returned, Maya replied, a sly grin tugging at her lips. They arrived together, blending into the crowd. Maya's heart thumped, but not with fear. It was anticipation, sharp, electric, delicious. The first ex, tall and smug, waved her over, clearly unaware that he had once stood her up without explanation. Maya approached with a soft smile, warm enough to seem innocent but laced with intent. "Hi," she said brightly. "I wasn't sure you'd make it." His smile faltered. "Oh hey, Maya, don't worry." She interrupted gently. "I've moved on. Actually, I've moved somewhere much better." She gestured subtly toward Ethan, who stood a few feet away, perfectly composed, holding a glass of wine and smiling at her. The ex's eyes widened. Recognition, shock, and something faintly like regret crossed his face. Maya didn't need to say another word. The presence of Ethan, someone who made her laugh, who mirrored her resilience, who had been a partner in her absurd pact, spoke louder than any confrontation could. Her second ex attempted a casual greeting, but Maya simply tilted her head, smiled sweetly, and whispered, "I hope life treats you well, really well." She let the words hang, polite yet barbed, as she walked away, the sound of her heels punctuating every step. Finally, the third ex, the one who had hurt her most recently. He was mid-conversation with someone else, oblivious to the storm approaching. Maya approached, her smile soft, her eyes bright with controlled mischief. "Funny running into you here," she said. He looked up, startled. "Maya, I didn't expect." She cut him off, not with anger, but with calm clarity. "I wanted you to see something. I've found someone who understands me, who values me, someone who actually shows up." She gestured subtly toward Ethan. His presence alone delivered the message. Maya was no longer waiting, no longer hurt, no longer theirs to disregard. The ex blinked, caught between disbelief and regret, as Maya's expression softened. "I hope you find your own happiness," she said, voice almost melodic, "but don't try to ruin mine. I've worked too hard for it." And just like that, Maya turned and walked away, Ethan falling into step beside her. The tension in the room seemed to shift, as if her self-assured stride had pushed away the ghosts of betrayal. They found a quiet corner, and Ethan reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers naturally. "You were incredible," he whispered, admiration and awe in his voice. Maya laughed softly, leaning against him. "It's amazing what a little poetic justice can do." Ethan grinned. "We make a good team, don't we?" "We make the best team," Maya corrected, squeezing his hand. She realized then that her revenge wasn't about hurting her exes. It wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about reclaiming herself, finding joy and laughter again, and refusing to let anyone else define her worth. As they stepped back into the crowd, Maya felt a lightness she hadn't known in months. She and Ethan exchanged a glance, a private celebration of shared survival, humor, and unexpected connection. Her heart, once bruised and jilted thrice over, felt full, not because she had proven anything to her past, but because she had discovered someone who could walk beside her through life's absurdities. Someone who laughed with her, held her hand, and reminded her that even heartbreak could lead to the sweetest victories. And as she leaned slightly against Ethan, whispering, "Best revenge ever," she knew it was true. Not vengeance over her exes, but triumph over her own past pain. and a love that had begun in the most ridiculous, wonderful way imaginable.